For hunting, there are two types of scopes. Ideally, there are the fixed power scope and the zoom power scopes. The fixed power scopes will have a single magnification size, either 4 times, 6 times, or 8 times, or the variable type will be a 3 to 9, or a 3.5 to 12, or a 4 to 16, 6 to 24, and basically this means the single power scopes will have one fixed image of the target that you're looking at, and the variable power will be able to zoom from 3 times the image to 9 times the image, similar to using a camera and bringing the image closer to yourself. This does two things. Yes, it makes the target a lot bigger, but it also makes a lot more wobble with the rifle, and you'll find that it's a lot easier to use a scope with a lower power magnification. For most hunting situations, a 3 to 9 or a 3.5 to 10 times magnification is absolutely ideal. For the purposes of this rifle, we're fitting a 3.5 to 10 times scope. There are two types of mounting system to attach a scope onto a rifle, either a 2-piece mount or a 1-piece mount. A 2-piece mount literally means you have 2 separate pieces to the mount which attach onto the top of the rifle and allow the scope to be clamped in 2 positions. These are ideal on pre-charged pneumatic guns and CO2 guns which have very little recoil, but on a spring gun which has a lot more recoil with the piston and the spring moving, it is far better to fit a 1-piece scope mount which grips the whole length of the rail, as opposed to the 2-piece mounts which only grip, actually, as you can see. Although there are only 2 types of mount, in that there's the 1-piece and the 2-piece, there are within those various different heights, from low to medium to high to extra high, to cope with modern day rifle scopes, which have different diameter objective lenses. The average scope would be a 40 or a 42mm objective lens, which would be quite adequately fitted with a low or a medium mount. A lot of people now are shooting very large diameter front end scopes, and they require fitting a lot higher to the gun. The problem with this is the higher the scope goes on top of the rifle, the higher your head comes off the actual comb of the stock, making it a lot more unstable, which is why it's much better fitting an average scope of a 40, 42 or 44mm objective lens. Here you can see the 2 different heights of mounts. The back one here is a high mount, the one in front is a low mount. The scope on this rear mount would fit far, far too high on this rifle, making your head far too high off the cheek of the stock. With that removed, you can see the normal low mounts will allow the scope to be fitted much, much more closely to the barrel, allowing your head to be a lot more firmly onto the stock. The scope itself will now fit absolutely as tightly as possible to the barrel. As you can see, there's hardly a gap there now, but still enabling you to not be put off by the volumetric silencer at the front. When you get your mounts out of the packet, they'll be exactly as they are here, all assembled. You need to actually strip the mounts down, which is quite a simple process. Take the 4 screws from the top, from each mount, from each ring, and slacken off the 2 side fixing screws. When you have the mounts separated, fit the lower section of the mount to the scope rail of the gun and allow them to still be easily moved, so not too tight. The scope can then be rested gently into these, and you can get a rough feel of where they want to be centrally for the scope. The top of the scope mount can then be fitted back to the rings with the Allen keys that are provided, and again just loosely screwed on, not tightly at all, just so the scope is held and you can move it around. The idea when fitting the top ring back onto the mounts is to keep an equal gap both sides to make sure that everything is level. It's very easy to put a ring on top, screw one side down, and then it crushes the scope because you're not tightening equally as you're putting them on. It's very similar to fitting a cylinder head onto an engine. Each screw wants to be done as opposites and just carefully until you get a nice even fit. When the top rings are fitted just so they're just biting and you can feel a little bit of tension as you start to turn them, you can still move the scope within the rings. It will then allow you to get it so it's in full focus as you shoulder the rifle. So as the rifle's in the shoulder, the scope wants to have the crosshairs at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock. So they want to be turned just gently and carefully until it's in the right position for your own eye. A lot of people say, can you zero a rifle for me? It's very, very difficult because everybody holds and shoots a rifle differently. But as the gun comes into the shoulder, as if you're going to shoot a rabbit or a pigeon or whatever quarry you're shooting, you should just put it up naturally, your head hits the cheek and the scope should fill completely with daylight. If when you shoulder the rifle you have to move your head to do this, then the scope is in the wrong position. Equally, if you push it on and you have to move your head forward to allow the scope to fill up with daylight, then it is again in the wrong position. As the rifle comes to the shoulder, a nice clear picture, that's fine. The crosshairs are straight, the scope is ready to have the rings tightened. They're just starting to bite, and you can go from opposite to opposite, just carefully locking them down, ever so gently, one side and the other. Until it's just on tight. One little tweak to make sure they are tight, and always when you are shooting, just keep an Allen key to hand. You can always check to make sure they're tight even when you're in the field. It's always a good idea to have an Allen key as part of your kit, and one that is a suitable size for the scope rings as well as any other parts on the gun. That's then nice and tight. You know the gaps between the scope mounts are equal. Make sure obviously that the sides are all tight and they're all locked up, which they are, and that's ready to be zeroed in. One question that I do get asked quite frequently is what maintenance is involved in owning and using a pre-charged air gun, and really the only answer to that is to say unless it is broken or something is wrong with the gun, leave well alone. They work on very high pressure systems, and either leave it to a competent gunsmith. The manufacturers of all pre-charged guns are more than happy to have their guns back in for a full service, re-lubricate, check all the seals and make sure the gun is performing as it should be below the legal limit.